Hello and welcome to Take Your Medicine. I'm Jacob.
And I'm Sadie.
And we've got kind of a silly episode going this time around. Silly episode for Silly World. Well,
series of silly episodes.
Should we jump right into some gay stuff?
Sure.
Okay. So let's take a look at this.
All right. I pledge my heart. To the rainbow. Of the not so typical gay camp. One camp. Full of pride. Indivisible. With affirmation and equal rights for all. Watch your heads.
Okay, well, what did we just see there?
So that was a video of Pete Buttigieg's husband, the Butt Stuff family.
Yeah, we call him Pete Butt Stuff.
Pete Butt Stuff.
Mr. Pete and Cheston Butt Stuff.
Also, Cheston is the dumbest name ever.
It kind of is.
That's his husband. Completely bastardizing our Pledge of Allegiance for gay children.
Yeah.
Which you shouldn't even be able to say gay children in a sentence.
I know. There's a lot of young people here.
Oh my gosh.
Like, do you think this older kid right here with the orange hair is one of the counselors?
No.
Kind of seems like it, right?
I don't think so. No, I think he's probably, or it, or whatever it is probably not a counselor because he's not really that into it. He's like, I don't know what I'm saying.
But look at some of these kids, like these kids in the background here.
Yeah, the one kid was like pledging with their hand like on their throat. I'm like, okay, so you don't even know how to do the pledge. Look, do you see her?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not where your heart is, girl.
Yeah, this is very disturbing. I think, there's a lot
They're
of...
like 10 or 11.
Yeah, they're young, and
This is a gay camp in, I forget, I think it's like Idaho or Iowa. Maybe Iowa. But...
Yeah, I don't know, but it's disturbing because, like, no one should be talking about these kind of, like, sexual morality with young children, right?
Right, well, and I was hearing people talk about this, and they kept calling it a gay camp, and I was like, that sounds so weird to me, because when we were growing up, if somebody said, oh, they got sent to gay camp, it meant, like, you were going for conversion therapy. Like, that is what they meant by gay camp.
Yeah.
And now it's, like, the opposite, where you go to become gay, I guess.
It's a gay indoctrination. It is a conversion therapy camp. They're just converting you to be gay and genderqueer. And...
They're taking back a gay camp.
But it's just like, is this not what groomers do? They take
this is
advantage.
Exactly what groomers do.
Take advantage of young, impressionable children and then teach them that all of this degenerate nonsense is perfectly not only acceptable but desirable, right? We want to, in that pledge, he was like, we're going to affirm affirmation and equal rights for all.
Yeah.
I just have a problem generally with any ideology that wants to just affirm everything that you do.
Right.
Like, an ideology that doesn't call for you to be a better version of yourself is an inherently destructive ideology.
Right.
And I think Jordan, that's not unique. Jordan Peterson sort of makes that point, right? He's like, the worst thing you can tell a young person is you're fine the way you are.
Right.
No, you're not. You're never fine the way you are. There's always something to do better. And saying that, oh, well, your sexual degeneracy, you're young, and so anything that you find about your sexuality is automatically affirmed. You want to do X, Y, and Z thing as a young child? Go do it. We're not going to hold you back. We're not going to judge.
This video is coming up in circulation at the same time as that a really controversial... Not really controversial, but they're making it a controversial bill that Governor DeSantis just signed into law in Florida.
The parental rights
and
education bill.
Yes, and everyone's making it into the don't say gay bill, and it's like, that has nothing to do with anything. Because the bill is parental rights, but it also is, it's not preventing kids from learning things or saying things in classes. It's just preventing the curriculum from being structured certain topics.
Right.
Like you cannot have your curriculum structured around gay things. You cannot have just like you can't have your curriculum structured around religious things.
Yeah.
If you're in a public school, maybe there will be some charter schools that start cropping up that are like LGBT charter schools, because there's Catholic schools, there's Christian schools that you can opt to pay to send your child to.
Right.
And so kind of that those religious doctrines are going to be imbued in the curricula. So maybe there will be some LGBTQ charter schools that pop up, and then that the curriculum is going to be something to do with gay rights and equity and BS. Because I think there was a charter school that just opened up in Portland too that was supposed to be for like BIPOC students.
Mean, if you want to
so
do
they're
that,
going to have critical race theory in their curriculum specifically.
people have a right to freely associate, but I think that's what's pernicious about this going through the public schools is that a lot of times the kids that are in the public schools don't have the choice.
Right.
It's their public school really should, by definition, should be catering to the lowest common denominator. And
Right.
what I mean by that is not catering to the stupid people or the special kids.
Right.
What I mean is it should be teaching all of the most unoffensive, non-controversial things.
Right.
That's what I mean by lowest common denominator. Because things like what is appropriate in terms of sexual morality, those are hotly debated topics. And if it's hotly debated, in my opinion, it shouldn't even be discussed at certain levels of public school.
Right.
If you want to make the argument that like high schoolers should be exposed to sophisticated argumentation around these ideas, I don't necessarily have a problem with that as long as it's presented in a balanced manner.
Right.
But yeah, young kids who literally are just like incapable of thinking on a much deeper, more sophisticated level should not really be exposed to these controversial ideas.
Right.
It's like you kind of just have to teach them the nuts and bolts of foundational knowledge. Like, here's how science works. Here's how math works.
Right.
Here's basic anatomy. That's fine too. But yeah, controversial issues, no, they shouldn't have any place at all in the classroom.
Well, and with the parental rights bill that just passed, people on the left are trying to make the argument that, it's wrong to, like in math class, for instance, your word problem could be Johnny and his two moms. And people on the left are trying to play that like, well, why is that not an okay thing to say in public school? Because it is the normal for some students. Why is that wrong? And the counter argument that I've heard is that you would not have that same reaction and you wouldn't be supporting free speech in the same way if it did have to do with religion. Like if you said, God made one man and one woman, how many people is that? Like,
Right.
you couldn't do that.
Right.
So saying like Johnny and his two moms went to the store and bought a dozen apples, how many apples is that? Like, you still can't do that. You could say Johnny and his two parents, and then it has no bias at all in it, because if you are a kid with two gay parents, then you're just going to immediately input like, oh, Johnny must have two moms because you said his two parents. And if that's your reality, and if you're not allowed to have freedom of speech and put religion into your schooling, then you can't also do that with other controversial topics.
Yeah.
Just because it's freedom of speech. And
Well, Michael Knowles had this discussion with a
Yeah.
friend of his. Maybe that's
That's
what
what-
you're
yeah.
referring to. I wish I would have clipped it actually, because it would have been really nice to sort of talk about their conversation. But basically, the guy that he was arguing, that Michael Knowles was arguing with, is essentially saying, well, of course I wouldn't support the religious viewpoint of like it's a sacred institution endorsed by God, you
Right.
know, right? But the point that Michael Knowles made, which was really good, is that the left wing is making a quasi-religious argument. They are making statements of morality. They are saying that it is okay for people to express their sexuality or their gender in certain ways, and that any barriers to that should be destroyed and everyone should be accepting and affirming. That is not, they're trying to make the argument that's real. And I have no doubt that there are kids that struggle with their sexuality. That's totally, I think, probably normal or almost normal. But to decide what you do about a situation where somebody is confused about their sexuality, or to decide how you educate children in terms of how they should behave in a moral sense, that is a philosophical judgment you have to make. There's no reality there.
Right.
There's nothing in reality that says that we have to affirm every, degenerate impulse that someone has.
Right.
So it's like, but by saying that we should, you're making a moral statement. You're making a statement of values. You're saying
Right.
my value is that everyone should be affirmed regardless of how they express their sexuality. And then the conservative religious viewpoint is,
Right.
no, there's a very strict and narrow bounds for how sexuality can be moral.
Right. Well, and the reason I think leftists reject their moral premises, I guess you could say, as they reject it as being quasi-religious, because they're like, well, we aren't all focused on one common goal or whatever. But that's not true. They are focused on a common goal. It's just such a broad common goal that they fail to realize that it's a common goal, I think. And so they're like, well, yes, of course, I am a pro-trans activist, and that person over there is like pro-BLM activist or whatever. Their common goal is still equity and inclusion, because both of those activists are going to use those same terms, but because they're operating in different enough spheres, they don't see it as a common goal, and so they don't recognize it as a religious path, I guess you could say, a religious doctrine or a mentality mindset that is informing their moral choices. But it is. And so they try to get away with saying, well, it's not spiritual, it's not religious because there's no God or there's no deity. But it's like, that's not really what religious means, though. Religious doesn't mean that there is a presence of a deity or multiple deities or a creator or anything like that. It's more of, there is doctrine that you follow, and there is a small group of people who has determined the doctrine, and if you don't follow that doctrine, you are not part of this group.
Right.
That's what religion is. Because religion and God are separate, usually together, but they're separate. So you can have a deityless religion, I would say. Because that's what Satanism is too.
Yeah.
Satanism, there's no deity. They don't, because they worship themselves or whatever. But
right.
To say it's not a spiritual argument is false.
Yeah, there's like spiritual doesn't, I don't even think spiritual necessarily means like supernatural. It's just like, what is the proper way to live your life as a human with a human experience? Like that.
Well, it's of the spirit
right.
of a person.
Right. It's like,
so.
It's like, what is the optimal life that you should be living? What is the idealized version of life? And that's what spirituality's about, right? It's about a focus on that. And if your spirituality is, I want to live my life as I see fit and express myself however I want, then it's going to manifest itself in the pledge of gay allegiance.
Right. Well, and I think that's where the pull to Satanism comes from too, because if you're manifesting that in a way of like, I am going to do whatever I want that makes me happy, then it's a very egotistical living, and your morality is derived from whatever you have determined is going to be the easiest and best thing for you personally. So your morality isn't drawn from other people's experiences or external doctrine or external influences. It's all, my morality is just whatever is going to put me in the optimal position in any given scenario all the time, which is where you get this affirmation of mental illness.
Yeah.
Because if you're okay with affirming your own mental illness because it's the easier thing and it suits you at almost every given moment, it's not going to end well. It's just it's a net negative.
Yeah.
Personally and interpersonally.
And I'm noticing I don't know, maybe like a loose theme going on here, but it's like, it seems like all the major like world philosophies or philosophical thinkers, you kind of see this theme of like the way to live a moral life is to deprive yourself of certain things, right? You can think about monks, they deprive themselves of speech sometimes and food and worldly possessions, I think Jesus was famous for that, like depriving himself of worldly possessions. And, you think about all these monks and stuff that fast for a long, it's just like, that's deprivation. And, a lot of the morality that comes from Christianity is depriving yourself of the things you could have if you gave into temptation. So like depriving yourself of multiple on the theme of sexuality, sexual relationships, or depriving yourself of envy, right? Like making yourself not feel that. So it's all about adopting constraints and depriving yourself of certain things so you can live a more meaningful life. This is a life of excess. This is a hedonistic lifestyle. This is, no, I reject the fact that I need to deprive myself. I reject the fact that I need boundaries. I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm going to sleep with whoever I want. I'm going to express myself however I want. So it's like, you know, this is, I think, in many ways, that is the gay agenda. It's to break down all and any constraints, to say that all constraints are bad. Anyone that's living their true, authentic self is the moral way to live. And I just don't think that's true. It's not true if you look at the history of philosophy. Like, every major philosopher has identified the need for constraints to deprive yourself.
Well, and it makes the adults in the gay community even worse. It makes them look even worse, and it makes me believe that they are even worse that you say that, because they're grooming children to become a part of the hedonistic lifestyle that they are a part of. And that's almost worse, because if you are so, how do I put this? Hedonistic, I guess, but worse than that. Like, if you just have no impulse control and you crave everything and you want no constraints at all, so much so that you now have to pull children into it, it's like, that is another barrier that you're trying to break down that is just more deplorable than any other barrier you could break down.
Yeah.
Because we know where this goes. And that's gross. Adults and children do not go together.
Yeah.
But that's where it's going. I mean, if you have gay adults telling children, like, let's talk about your sexuality, or let's talk about your parts. I'm sorry. Like, if you were 5 years old and you went home to mom and said, yeah, my gym teacher wanted to talk about my parts today, you'd be like, whoa. I'm sorry, what? Your gym teacher is a pedophile and we're reporting him to the police immediately, or whatever, or her, or whatever. But for whatever reason, if you're a gay teacher, all of a sudden that's okay.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know how many of these teachers are actually gay and how many of them have done this on purpose because they realize that they can groom children, and it's a workaround for pedophilia.
Yeah, and I think there's
You know what I mean?
there's another question coming off of that. It's like, how many people are gay simply because that was the way that they're born? They're just wired differently.
Right.
And how many people are gay because that's more of like a weird sexual thing, right? Like, how many?
True,
like,
yeah.
Because I think you look at people like Douglas Murray and Dave Rubin, who are both gay men, but they're very like upstanding. They don't shove it in your face. They're just like normal dudes.
Yeah, they just
happen to have husbands.
Yeah, right.
But they never talk about it, and you can tell that they're put together adults. They would never go and talk to children about sexuality.
No, it's just
so
that's
like,
who they decided to marry or whatever.
So that's just however it is. That's how they're wired. But I wonder how many people are just degenerates. And I know that distinction doesn't exist for like Christians, like everyone's a degenerate, but
yeah, I mean, I don't know if they would necessarily say that everyone's a degenerate, but everyone is a sinner.
Right. Well,
that follows that thing. But like, if you're a sinner, but otherwise an upstanding citizen, I don't think they would say you're a degenerate. Right. But if you're doing something like Mr. Butt Gig here, you are probably a degenerate and also a sinner.
Yeah. Well, that's for sure. I mean, it's just, I mean, think about, like, even if my sexuality was different, like trying to put myself into the position where I would feel comfortable talking to young children about these types of things, I would be like, no, get me as far away from that as possible. I don't want anything to do with that. Like, I felt bad for the health teachers that had to like explain basic anatomy to like 16-year-olds, right? I
always felt bad being in the class because I was like, I feel like you shouldn't be telling me these things. I was like, I don't like this at all. I don't, this is not an okay thing.
Yeah.
That's why the scene in Mean Girls is so funny with the gym coach. Because he's like, don't have sex. You will get pregnant and die.
Yeah.
Or he's like, you will get chlamydia and die.
Yeah.
And he's like, everybody take a rubber. And that's like their whole health class. And I'm like, that's about all you need to know.
That is like, yeah.
Just scare them into thinking they're going to die and move on.
Yeah, it's not fun. I don't like that this is happening. And that just we need more people like Ron DeSantis. Just put the kibosh on this.
The kibosh.
Put the kibosh on
Put the
this.
kibosh on this. I mean, they're going to try to say it's the Don't Say Gay bill or whatever, and they have tried to smear him so many times already. And every time he's just like, look, I did what I did. I'm not going to apologize for it. Let's move on. And then in a day or two, no one talks about it anymore because he just lets it go.
Yeah.
He's like, I already did it. Already said it. I am not going to apologize, and we're not going back on it. So, and then they have to give up.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think we may have exhausted the gay topic for now.
for now.
Thank you, Pete Butt stuff. When you're in the news again, we will
Pete Butt
talk about it again. So should we
Anyway.
talk about the next big thing in the news, which is Ukraine?
Yes.
You have this story.
I do have this story, and I don't necessarily want to beat a dead horse about the Ukraine Russia thing, but I did think this is interesting just because the conflict in Eastern Europe it's causing a lot of people to think, like, if we do end up in a hot war at some point, whether that's in the near future or the distant future, because it's going to happen at some point in our nation's history, we will be involved in another hot war. We just don't know when.
Yeah.
And so it's really getting people's gears turning, and they're starting to think about what they would do
Yeah.
if it ever came to U.S. soil. And so this is from the Post Millennial, and the headline is, if U.S. was invaded, most Republicans and independents would stay and fight, most Democrats would flee. And it's a poll. I want to say it's a Quinnipiac poll.
It is.
I couldn't remember.
Here it is.
So according to a Quinnipiac University poll, if Americans were facing the same circumstances as Ukrainians, 68% of Republicans and 57% of independents said that they would stay and fight. It's a pretty good number, compared to only 40% of Democrats who would stay. 52% of Democrats said they would flee the country, compared to only 25% of Republicans.
So I'd be interested to see if we go into this, if there's like a gender breakdown, because, 25% of Republicans wanting to flee, if that's all women,
Right.
that makes sense, right? Like, get the women out of danger.
Which would make sense. Like 68% of Republicans are probably men.
Yeah,
Like,
something
that's-
like that.
Because I don't think as many women are Republican
Yeah.
as men
It's
are.
not
So
a
I feel like
50-50
that
split.
breakdown is probably pretty representative, but they didn't go into
Okay.
gender because I think it was just like they just picked up
I
the
would be
phone and
interested.
asked.
My prediction is like the Republican men would overwhelmingly stay.
Right.
Maybe the Republican women would be like 50-50 stay or leave.
Right.
Depending on, what their life situation is, I guess.
Right.
That would be my expectation, but yeah, it's unfortunate we don't have that breakdown.
Well, and it's another thing too, if you're talking about men versus women, like how many women would be forced to evacuate and how many would flee voluntarily, because at some point, if war becomes too terrible, like your government is telling women and children to leave. Obviously they can't make you, but there's like a big push to make sure the women and children are gone before any actual battles occur. But you're always going to have like nurses and women who are staying to help with feeding the soldiers and stuff like that. So you're always going to have your outliers, but probably the childrenless women more than the women with children.
Yeah.
But, yeah. And then they did do a breakdown of race, which was interesting. But additionally, 38% of African Americans surveyed said that they would stay and fight versus 59% who said they would leave. Among Hispanics, 61% said they would stay and fight compared to 33% who would leave.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I wonder why that is. I would be interested to see the breakdown now by geography. Like, would more
Right.
Southern blacks stay and fight versus
Right, maybe.
in the North?
Which is weird.
Yeah.
Because there weren't slaves in the North, but for whatever reason, Southern black people tend to be more patriotic than Northern black people. And I don't really understand how that came to be.
Yeah.
Because the majority of our racism existed in the southern regions of our nation for a long time and don't really anymore. Like, all of the racism seems to be in the northern states, in the Union states, which is just bizarre. Like, I don't know how that happened. Maybe because of the slaves that were able to flee.
I don't know.
prior to, I don't know,
I have no
prior
clue.
to abolition. But Hispanics is kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of Hispanic people are either first generation Americans or immigrants themselves. And so they're very proud to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they would stay and fight for the country. But that's just speculation.
Yeah, I mean, and if especially you think about like Cuban Americans or
Right.
Venezuelan Americans,
Right.
they came from bad countries, found a country that they loved that was infinitely better. For
Right.
it to become endangered, now they're like, oh wait, we need to fight to preserve. They have a perspective, I think, which is much more like, we need to preserve this because I know what it's like when you come from
Exactly.
something worse, right?
Cuban Americans are very proud people.
Yes.
They really like America.
Yeah. I don't blame them.
Yeah, right. Quinnipiac University polling analyst Tim Malloy said, quote, when confronted with a terrible hypothetical that would put them in the shoes of the Ukrainians, Americans say that they would stand and fight rather than seek safety in another country. According to the poll, the majority of Americans, 55%, said they would stay and fight, and only 38% of those surveyed said they would leave the country. So I guess that's kind of a white pill.
Yeah.
Because knowing that, I mean, 55%, again, if we're looking at gender breakdown, that's probably most of our men.
Yeah.
55%. I don't know.
I would say it's probably, if you broke it down, so of the 55% that said they would stay, I'm sure you would find most of that was men.
Right.
Maybe 60%, maybe 70%.
Well, I think women are the majority in the country, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
That would be my
But-
hunch. Because I have a feeling, like, even if you looked at the gender breakdown of Democrats, I have a feeling that you'd see a higher share of Democrat men saying they'd stay and
Right.
fight.
But just going off of the entire nation, like 55% just without gender,
Right.
it would kind of make sense because our nation is close to being 50-50 men and women. So 55% of people saying that they would stay and fight is like probably more representative of your men than of your women.
But yeah, but not by a lot. Like, I'm thinking
No,
like
yeah.
60-40 split,
Right.
maybe.
But that's still pretty close.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. But it's good to see that most people or most men, if we're speculating, would want to stay and fight for
Right.
this country. So that's cool.
And the other thing about this too is it doesn't capture the reasoning, obviously, for the answer. Like,
Right.
somebody might say, yes, I want the country to be defended and I hope I can return, but given my personal circumstance, it would be smarter for me to leave. Like, if you're an old woman,
Right.
if you're 70 years old and a woman, you could stay and fight, but I think most people would probably rather prefer that you get to safety.
Right.
And if that means fleeing the country for a little
Although,
bit.
how badass would that be if all of our elderly people were just like, here's give me an M16.
Yeah.
I'm going to the front line because I've lived my life. I'm going to shoot down any person that I can. That would be amazing.
Grandma baking cookies for the front, just like, here you go.
Yeah, Grandpa's got his cane and the M16, and he's like one-handed shooting people, and Grandma's like, they're fresh off the stove or whatever, fresh off the fire. That would be hilarious, but...
That'd be so funny.
And then there was another poll from Rasmussen that Jack Posobiec had tweeted out, and this was by income breakdown. And the Rasmussen tweeted, if a wider war breaks out in Europe, should the U.S. military be involved? And all voters that voted yes was 49%, and then yes by income. The highest percentage was anybody who made over $200,000. That was at 66%.
So yeah, 2/3 of people support military involvement if they make over $200,000.
2/3 of that 49%, yeah. But it's
Right.
just, it's interesting to see that people who are supporting U.S. involvement in a war that is not ours to be involved in are the wealthy, primarily. It just shows you how out of touch they are with
Yeah.
the scenario and our involvement in the conflict and what our involvement should be appropriately, because they don't seem to understand that Ukraine is not, they're not our largest ally, so it doesn't really make sense strategically for us to be
Right.
providing as much support as we are.
But they have the luxury of being able to have the opinion like, oh, of course we should help them. Like, we should do whatever they need. But it's like, they're not going to bear the consequences of that action, because it's
Right.
the military is mostly like, a lot of people who come from bad economic backgrounds go into
Yep.
the military. Like that's just what they do to get out of that situation.
Yep.
And it's good that it's there. It's good that they can do that. But those are the types of people that are going to be sent into the war.
Right.
It's these people that come from backgrounds where they didn't have much opportunity. I don't think you're seeing many rich kids entering the military because the parents wouldn't allow that. They'd be like,
Right.
no, we have all this money. We're paying for you to go to school. You're going to school.
Exactly.
That would be like the upper middle class or the, lower upper class response to
Right.
somebody wanting to join the military. Whereas, in a poorer community, that might be like celebrated. Like, yes, you're
Right.
finally getting out of here. Like, go.
Right. Well, and it's seen as honorable and like a good career path because you put your 20 years in and you retire with a hefty pension.
Mhm.
They pay for you to live forever if you give your 20 years to the military. So it's really frustrating because I am just so sick of really rich people trying to steer the course of the entire nation when they are not near the majority of Americans, and they just don't even care what us plebes below have to say about anything. They just don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to be able to still, check their news and tweet about the support for
Right.
Ukraine while the cities are being shelled and people are dying. And they're going to be like, look at how exciting this is. But
Right.
also, it's so terrible.
Well, I mean, thankfully, I think the conflict is kind of winding down.
It seems to be. I mean,
I think Putin is going to have all his demands met, and I honestly don't think they're unreasonable demands.
Reasonable or unreasonable, like, there's really only one option. And you should accept his demands.
Well, true, because he'll raise your country, but I mean, we talked about that before, but he just doesn't want Ukraine to become part of NATO
Right.
because it would put us in his backyard, and he's not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I don't think that's geopolitically unreasonable or irrational.
Right. Yeah, it's like I'm continually baffled by the fact that some people just can't come to terms with the fact that Ukraine is just a pawn in a geopolitical game.
I
and
know.
Putin has decided to move to take that pawn
Right.
from the West.
Right.
That's what he's doing. Like, we shouldn't. Is the experience of the civilians on the ground terrible? Yes.
Obviously,
But
yes.
that doesn't mean that it requires larger involvement from us.
No.
Like, Ukraine is largely in this position because of us. Like, we've been
Yeah.
manipulating them to no end for a decade plus
But
now.
Jacob, they're an independent nation.
They're a
They're
fledgling
a
democracy.
sovereign nation,
Yeah.
Jacob. There's no corruption there at all. We should really be providing them humanitarian aid.
Yeah, so it's just like, it's the unfortunate reality is we tried to use them as a pawn in a geopolitical game.
Mm-hmm.
It worked for a little bit. Putin decided to take the upper hand, and now he's winning. There's
Just chess.
right, there's hundreds of those little games going on every day, if not more, on the global stage.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this earlier, I don't know, or remember who with, but it has really shown that the Western propaganda is by far the strongest.
Oh, yeah.
For all of like, oh, Russian disinformation, the U.S. media has done a really good job instantly reprogramming the NPCs
yeah.
to start caring about Ukraine uncritically. Like you're not
day
allowed to
one
say.
of the invasion, people were putting Ukraine flags in their Twitter handles. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Why are you taking a side?
Yeah.
Unless you're Ukrainian or Ukrainian American, like what? Huh? Why?
Yeah.
What are you doing? I don't know.
And there, journalists are running cover now for the U.S. government. You had this like biolabs in Ukraine story.
Oh, cheapers.
Which,
yeah.
I don't know what's going on there, but the accusation is that there are some biolabs in Ukraine that the United States is doing biological research in, either for weapons purposes or for disease purposes. But here's the thing. The Pentagon came out and issued like a very specific statement that was carefully worded to say, we are not currently working on any bioweapons in these labs. And it's like,
yes, there is a biologic facility.
right.
What did that woman say? She was like trying to be very careful with her words.
Right. But then the problem is the journalists are
Yeah.
taking that Pentagon statement and then saying, see, debunked. There's no bioweapons labs in the Ukraine. It's like you're literally just being stenographers for the security state. You are uncritically accepting what the CIA and the Pentagon are telling you and then using that to debunk claims about biolabs. So what? Anything the government says is automatically true? Is that
Yep.
the role of a journalist? Is just to fact check green whenever the
Yep.
government says it? It's just so. Oh, it pains
Well,
me.
it's state-run media at this point. I mean, it's no better than what the CCP has as their state-run media, because they have to follow the narrative of the administration, which is just so bizarre to me.
And here's how
I
good
just don't
the
understand.
NPCs are programmed.
Oh my gosh, I laughed so hard. So this is also from the Post-Millennial. Canadian news, Toronto restaurants to serve Kiev mules instead of Moscow mules. And this is on March 5th that this was written. So it was not that long after. I read that headline and I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, what?
So
Kicker. The ingredients are the exact same. It's just that instead of
They just renamed
using Russian vodka, they use Swedish vodka.
so wait, shouldn't it be like a Stockholm mule?
Exactly. But also vodka is a Russian word, so you have to start calling that liquor something else.
Stockholm spirit?
There you go.
I don't know. Yeah, it's amazing how the Western media got all the NPCs to immediately hate Russians in the span of like a couple days.
And okay, also, I just sounded like I was from Minnesota there.
Oh, okay.
Mom had pointed that out to me, that when we record this, I sound very Minnesotan.
Well.
And I didn't notice it ever before. But anyway, everyone is trying to say like, oh, well, it's not, we don't hate Russian people. It's Putin that we don't like. But then at the same time, they're sending all of their humanitarian support to Ukraine and not the people of Russia. It's like the people of Russia are probably suffering too because of the economy that is just keeps tanking in Russia. I'm sure that it's really hard to get supplies there right now because it's all going to military effort. I'm sure that they're not super behind this war effort, so it's not like it's a morale boost in any way for the people. So it's like, why are you not sending all of your humanitarian efforts to the Russian people then if your fight is against Putin and not Russians?
Right.
But they don't do that. They just say that Russians are bad, or they don't say it in so many words, but all of their actions show that they are pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, even though they're trying to make it about Putin and not Russians. But they're doing a bad job at that.
Well, and here's a baffling thing too. So all these Western companies, from financial institutions even to video game companies, they're like totally removing their services and products from Russia. And it's like, I think, well, I have two things to say about this. One, if you're trying to put pressure on the Russian government, punishing the Russian people is not the way to do it. Like,
Right.
what you're doing is
Because he doesn't care.
you have an opportunity, like, there was a developer that removed a video game, I forgot what it was, from the Russian market. And it's like, okay, well, you're just making players who might have enjoyed that game angry.
Right.
Like, you're not doing anything except hurting the Russian people. Vladimir Putin's not sitting at his PC booting up Steam.
Damn.
Right. He's not. But here's the thing. If you're trying to damage the Russian government in the eyes of the Russian people, wouldn't it be much more effective to just patch your game to put like an anti-Russian government statement at the beginning? And yeah, your game might then get banned by the Russian government.
But then that gives the people a reason to be angry at their government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That you should, if you're interested in fomenting change in Russia by the people, force the Russian government's hand. Force the
Right.
government to ban these Western services.
Right.
Because that's going to make people angry. You're going to have a Soviet Union situation where like people coveted blue jeans because the government was banning it, right?
Right.
And that was like the in for the Western culture. That was like what kind of led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, was this Western culture seeping in. But they're doing the exact opposite. They're removing the Western culture from it
Right.
and doing it without the Russian government provoking it
Right.
directly.
Well, that's because they don't actually care about putting pressure on the Russian government. They're just saying things so that they can get away with funding humanitarian efforts and military efforts in Ukraine. That's it.
The reason that they're doing this is, I think, is just corporate virtue signaling.
Oh, well,
they're
yes.
removing their products now rather than getting banned by the Russian government, because when this all blows over, they're going to go back in. They're going to go back into the
Yeah,
market.
but if you were Russian and all of these companies pulled out and then they tried to come back in, wouldn't you be like, oh, fuck you? I'm
Yeah.
not giving you my money anymore because when you could have made a change, you didn't.
That might be the case. I mean, it's possible that they're making a calculation, but I think, my point is specifically the reason that they're not going to get banned by the Russian government is because they don't want to. They want to leave the door open to return to that market
No, I understand.
when it all blows over.
The corporations want to, but
Yes.
I'm saying why do they think that the Russian people aren't going to turn on those corporations once they do come back to Russia? Because they're voluntarily pulling their corporations out. But if that was something that the Russian people really liked or really benefited from, and now all of a sudden that's gone, why when they come back would the Russian people not go, screw you, we're not doing this because you're just going to leave whenever you want?
Yeah.
So it's a bad move for the corporations too, because they're probably losing support from a lot of Russian people.
But I think the problem is that the corporations feel like they're in a spot where they have to do something, and so they're just taking what they calculate to be the least damaging move, which is pulling out temporarily, waiting for it all to blow over, then going back in.
Yeah.
Because if they make the calculation to take on the Russian government directly and they get banned permanently, well, now they've just shut themselves out of an entire market.
Wouldn't that be something if they temporarily pulled out of Russia and then the Russian government was like, you're not allowed to come back?
That's what I would do. That's a good idea. If I was Putin,
Yeah.
I'd be looking at all these Western countries, be like, you're not allowed to come back to this market. You want to do this? Fine. You're not allowed to come back. Like, that would be the way to outplay the West, because they're just being sneaky and trying to make as much money as possible.
Well, because they're still hurting the Russian economy by pulling their businesses out of Russia. So if he's like, okay, you're voluntarily hurting our economy, so he could see that as like an act of aggression or whatever and just ban them.
Right.
It could be ban worthy enough because you're causing the economy to hurt even more.
Right.
Plus all of the sanctions that the U.S. government and Canadian government and whatever else is putting on.
It depends on what Putin wants to do in the future, too. If he wants to do more aggressive actions around that region, then it would actually be a benefit to him to have as few Western companies impacting his economy as possible.
Exactly. Because if he is independent, economically independent, and also has a chance to become economically stable in that independence, then he doesn't need the Western countries. And when he does decide to take another piece of the puzzle back, he's going to be fine.
Yeah. And the nature of him being nuclear pretty much guarantees that the United States and the West can't engage in a direct attack against Russia. So he might just be setting himself up, like setting the board up.
Yeah.
I don't know. I won't say that he predicted this withdrawal, but I think that this is a mistake by the West to voluntarily withdraw from the markets, because now you're just creating a situation where Putin can take more advantage of that.
Right.
So it's like,
I don't think he was planning for the corporations to get involved, but I could see him realizing that it's to his benefit.
Yeah.
And restructuring his strategy.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think Ukraine is probably going to cave soon, just because I don't think they can manage to take on Russian troops much more. And also their power plants are being targeted, and pretty soon they're not going to be able to power their country. So I think they're probably going to have to give into the demands pretty soon, even though the U.S. government just passed all of that money in the omnibus bill to send to Ukraine. It was like $700 billion or something like that.
Well, it's not all going to Ukraine. It's only $14 billion for Ukraine.
Was it?
Yeah, $700 billion is like the whole package, the whole defense budget, I think.
I thought it was $700 billion for the defense package, and then there was like another $700 billion for like COVID and.
Oh, well, that's the 700. There's the defense spending, which is like typically treated as separate from the overall budget.
Oh.
So they have like their discretionary and well, I forgot what the technical term is, but like the mandatory spending,
right?
Like the social services spending, and then they have the discretionary spending, and the discretionary spending, like half of that is military. And the other half the discretionary spending is, I think, around $2 trillion. Military is like $800 billion of that.
Okay.
And then the rest is for whatever else programs.
Okay.
I think that's how it is.
I couldn't remember I read the breakdown a couple days ago, but I couldn't remember. I can't remember now what.
But yeah, $14 billion is for Ukraine.
That's still too much money.
Yeah, it's
to a country that we do not benefit from pretty much in any way.
Yeah.
Civilians don't anyway. The military does, but
yeah. So I think if they're smart, they will take. I mean, I think, Biden came out today and explicitly said the United States is not going to engage in direct combat with Russia,
Which is great.
which is good. I don't know why it took this long to say it. Maybe they were hoping that that little uncertainty, which really wasn't an uncertainty, would be in Putin's mind and he would stop his assault. But everyone knew the U.S. wasn't getting involved. So you might as well have just said that from the onset. Like, we're not doing anything about this except providing like small arms and stuff. But, I mean, Ukraine's on their own, basically. Like, they're not going to get any direct help from NATO countries.
They're not NATO, so why would we?
Right. We can put as many Ukrainian flags in our Twitter bios as much as we want. And it's not going to make a difference. The Russians are knocking on the door. They're like, hello, we want in.
Hello, you Ukraine now? Come Russia. Come back.
we take back Moscow Mule.
Kiev Mule? No. Moscow Mule.
What's this supposed to be, Kiev Mule?
Yeah, I know. Everyone was saying the they're like, I don't know why we don't do a no-fly zone, and I'm like, you're retarded. Moving on.
If you can't figure out why we don't do that, then bye.
You obviously don't know what a no-fly zone is, if you're suggesting that. Okay, carry on.
Do you want to move on to, speaking of fake news?
Yeah. Giant venomous spiders.
This is kind of a fun story. Not really that fun, but this CNN headline says, giant venomous spiders infiltrated the southeastern U.S. and are expected to spread rapidly, experts say. So there's that experts say again. So it sounds kind of scary, right?
Megan Marbles?
Yeah. These giant venomous spiders, right? I'm like, oh, wow. Are we going to be Australia soon? Well, let's figure out what venomous means in this situation.
Uh-oh.
And this author, this subheadline literally says venomous, but not dangerous.
That doesn't make any sense.
They literally they're lying about stupid things like this.
But
for
why?
clicks. Why wouldn't they be lying about...
CNN, the new BuzzFeed.
Right. Why wouldn't they be lying about everything related to Ukraine? War gets a lot more clicks than giant venomous spiders, but they still have to sensationalize the giant venomous spiders. And for those curious, this says Joro spiders are venomous, meaning they can poison certain creatures like insects for a meal. However, the spider's fangs are virtually incapable of breaking human skin, Frick said. All right, well, there's your simulation.
Well,
Frick. Well, Frick, he said.
I mean, isn't that the case for most spiders?
Yes.
Like, they can't penetrate human skin, but they technically are, like, incredibly venomous that if they could, they would kill us.
Yeah, so that'd be like me listing, like, all the venomous spiders of the northeastern United States, and it would be, like, dozens of spiders, and all of them are medically insignificant to humans.
I was going to say, we have a bunch of different spiders that live in the woods around here that are technically very venomous, and they're quite large. I mean, they're size of like $1 coin. I mean, they're pretty big, and you're like, ugh, but they still can't, their fangs are still not strong enough to penetrate human skin. And even if they do, it's like you get a welt or whatever, but it's not like, it doesn't kill you. But they're technically still venomous. Like they could kill a dog.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
So
but,
this is the problem. Like this, the reason that I wanted to bring this up when I saw this is because it is a perfect demonstration of how they could be technically telling the truth, but still lying. Like, they put out a headline, giant venomous spiders. If you didn't read past the headline, you'd be like, we're turning into Australia. But the reality is, like, okay, they're technically venomous, but that has nothing to do with any relevance to our lives whatsoever, right? And even this Frick person says, like, they're invasive, but they're not invasive in, like, the sort of way that we think of where they're destructive of the environment. They can literally just, like, cohabit the environments that they're being brought to and exist as a normal part of the ecosystem. They're not going to cause any excess damage. They're not going to cause any problems. So it's like, it's
I wonder
literally...
if they would eventually, though, because of, like, food shortages.
Well, if you believe this expert, they won't. But the point is that this is literally a non-story that they've sensationalized up to create this narrative.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to believe. As a matter of fact, this is a perfect demonstration of how they apply this to other arenas.
Right.
They take stupid technicalities, blow them way out of proportion. They very carefully frame the story, bury the lead. They do all of these little tricks to put a certain feeling in your brain.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can read the article and find out it's BS, and sometimes you can't.
Right.
And so this is the point. Like, this one was self-evidently like BS.
Well, and I thought it was going to be BS because it was going to be like, what do you mean by giant? Like, larger than normal?
No, these are big. These are like 4 inches. Yeah, these are big.
But, you know, like, I immediately thought that something was probably wrong about it. It was like, giant spiders.
Yeah.
I'm like, how big is giant, though? Like, 2 inches? 4 inches? That's a pretty damn big spider.
I would classify that as giant for the United States, at least.
Yeah, well, depending on the region of the United States, too. I don't like spiders. That's a lot of leg. Ugh. Ick. But yeah, they want you to read a headline and then go, oh my gosh, and then just repeat the headline and not actually read the story.
Yeah.
Especially if they're sensationalizing the headline, you've already made up the story in your head that fits that headline. And so you're just going to repeat whatever you want to other people because you're like, oh my gosh, giant venomous spiders. It's got to be like 8 inches big and it'll bite you in the neck and kill you or whatever, you know, and like you've already made up the story in your head. It's not a Goosebumps book.
Yeah. It's
CNN, your national trash outlet. Yeah.
Apparently it's supposed to be getting better since the Jeff Zucker was ousted. Apparently
That's
the new
what they say.
Yeah, the new CEO apparently is coming in and just like trying to get back to like the 80s CNN where it was just like straight facts.
So he's taking Donald Trump's advice?
It seems like he is.
Did you see that Donald Trump's plane the other day had to make an emergency landing?
I did, yes.
Ugh, everyone was like, oh my God, Donald Trump. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was probably a routine type of emergency landing.
Well,
but
they had an engine failure, which is not super routine.
No, but that's something that they do train for.
Yeah.
I have friends that are pilots and they're like, we practice our engines failing. Like our professors or our flight instructors will literally turn the engines off and it's like, you have to figure out what you're going to do. And turning the engines back on is not an option.
But typically...
No.
Only one engine goes out and you still have redundant engines.
Right. So you can usually fly fine. You have to make some adjustments in how you're steering. But you just land just to be certain that no other engines are going to blow.
Yeah,
but it's not usually something dangerous, though, unless you fly into a goose.
Yes. Dangerous for the goose and for the plane.
Yes.
That's like the goose and the gander, like goose and the plane. I don't know. So speaking of Donald Trump, he was on a podcast. I forgot what the podcast was called.
Okay.
It's got a really dumb name.
Sure.
But he was on a podcast, and I actually watched it before it was eventually taken down by YouTube. You can imagine why, because of certain claims around the election that he was making on the podcast.
Of course.
But these guys that were doing the podcast, they were saying, no, we're not going to take this down. We don't back down. They're like these really...
Is it still on Rumble?
They never did it on Rumble. But they're like these really bro dudes that are like, nah, man, we don't back down. We don't do this. They're like big UFC guys. They're friends with Dana White from the UFC.
Yeah.
So that's how they got connected to do the podcast because Dana White recommended them. Anyway, they were like, no, we're not taking this down. We're not doing anything.
Nice.
YouTube took it down for them.
Right.
And so this was Donald Trump on the actually in the podcast.
Uh-oh.
This is him talking about it. So let's watch this.
This interview will have millions and millions of people, assuming it's not touched. Let's see if they allow you. I hate to say this to you because you guys are going to chicken out, I guarantee.
We don't chicken out, Don.
If you put up this whole thing, watch.
We don't chicken out, Don.
If you,
No, we don't chicken out. I'm telling you right now.
You don't chicken out?
Don, we don't chicken
Ready?
out.
You ready?
Let's hear it.
If you put up this whole interview, let's see what happens when Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all of them take it down. And let's see what happens when they threaten you and all that. Because we don't have a free press in our country. We have a press not so different. This is the beginning of communism. We have a press not so different than countries we don't want to talk about. Do you remember during the campaign?
So here he was. He said, this video is going to have millions of views, and you wait until they take it down. You wait until they start pressuring you. This video was taken down. This podcast was taken down when it had 5 million views.
Nice.
And YouTube just took it straight. They just said it violates claims around election. So
community guidelines or whatever, I'm sure.
I don't know what to say around this other than obviously Donald Trump understands the landscape, even though he's not super involved with YouTube. He was deplatformed.
Well,
So he understands the game that's being played. He understands what he can't say, and he says it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And
because he's trying to actively fight censorship, no matter how many times they have to remove him. Because they can remove him, deplatform him from everything, so much so that he has to go and build his own platform that they cannot censor him on. And then he makes appearances like this. He puts out other videos because it doesn't matter how many times they take his stuff down. He will always find a way to get his word out. And people will find it.
Yeah.
And they will spread it because there is truth to things that he says that people crave.
Mm-hmm.
There is always going to be a craving for the truth. And if someone is being censored so actively, you're like, I want to hear what they have to say because it might be very important if it keeps getting taken down.
Yeah. I was having a conversation about this with my friend. It was like the flat earthers. The flat earthers aren't allowed on YouTube anymore.
Really?
Yeah, you cannot.
Oh, man.
You basically can't put a video on YouTube that is in direct opposition to any scientific consensus.
Oh.
So, like, if you're a flat earther and you're arguing, you will get banned.
Dang.
But here's the problem with that.
I used to love going down those rabbit holes.
Well, here's the problem with that. Not only are you banning flat earthers, but you're also banning you're sort of soft banning the people that would make debunking videos of the flat earthers.
Right.
So, like, I am a pretty smart person. I don't know how to derive the fact that the earth is round by myself.
Right.
Maybe I'd be able to figure it out if I sat for a couple weeks by myself. And like use my basic understanding of geometry to like derive the circumference. But that leaves me vulnerable. I am relying on the fact that scientists have told me that this is true and I've accepted it as true. It makes sense. I'm sure I could figure out why it's true just by doing a quick Google search, right? But the problem is I don't have that intuition. I don't have that ability to derive that, right? You're depriving me of the ability to see what an effective counter argument to the flat earth theory looks like.
Right.
And so maybe not me personally, but if I'm somebody that's in that position and I hear a very convincing yet wrong flat earth argument that appears very scientific, because these guys aren't just like spouting craziness. They're using scientific arguments. They're just wrong in their assumptions or they're wrong in their math or whatever, right? If you're depriving me of seeing that and the debunking and I see it on some other website in some underground place, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, they're hiding this from me. They're hiding this information. These guys are making perfect sense. Why would they ban them?
Because you have no tools to make a counter argument either to the flat earthers themselves or even in your own mind going, that doesn't sound right because X, Y, and Z that I learned elsewhere.
If you've been told all your life that the earth is round and you don't know why fundamentally that's true, you don't know how to derive that information, and you get presented with a really well-structured flat earth argument, you're going to be vulnerable to just accepting that. You're going to be like, wait, this makes so much more sense, right?
Right. Well, and I remember in high school I went down like one of those 2 a.m. YouTube rabbit holes and it just happened to be about flat earth. I must have watched like 4 hours straight of people trying to prove that the earth is flat. And there were so many videos of people disproving themselves with their experiments.
Oh, really?
They're like they were very, very sound experiments. Like the procedure was all very clear and concise and backed scientifically and mathematically. So it wasn't like they weren't just making whatever. Yeah. They had really thought out how this experiment was going to go, and they were convinced that the Earth was flat. And I don't remember exactly how they did the experiment, but it had to do with a light beam. It was like they had to do it at a very specific time, specific latitude, longitude points, but they were using high beam lights to determine if the Earth was flat. And he was like, because the Earth is flat, we should be able to see both beams at the same time at this certain time, whatever. And it didn't happen. And he's going, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, I should be able to see that light. Something's wrong with that light. And he was like radioing the other guy. He's like, is the light on? Is the light on? Something's wrong. I can't see this light. And he's like, no, it's on. And he's like, what? He like could not figure out why his experiment was failing because he had convinced himself so deeply that the earth was flat. And even at the end of the video, after the experiment concluded, he was still like, well, I know the earth is flat. Something went wrong with my experiment. And he was like trying to fix it. And I'm sitting there going, no, dude, the earth is not flat. You can't see the beams because it's curved. It was so funny. But if I hadn't seen somebody disproving themselves, I might be more convinced because his experiment was set up so nicely.
Right, exactly.
If I hadn't seen him freak out and go, I can't even comprehend how I could be wrong, I'd be like, well, maybe he is right, but he was just losing it. And I thought it was so funny. I'm like, well, you just proved that the earth is round with your experiment. So...
But see, that's the danger in banning that information.
Exactly.
And basically all
I just thought it was
information is
funny.
that you make people vulnerable to accepting falsehoods about the world.
Right.
I'm not saying that the election claims are false. Some of them look a little sketchy, but by banning that, you're just driving people into these quote unquote underground communities
Right.
where they just continue to believe that.
Well,
and so
you
it's
don't
like,
really leave any room for people to think critically either because they don't have all of the anecdotal data or actual factual data to look at and then make an informed decision. You've taken away people's ability to think critically about anything.
and you've deprived the general public of the ability to see like expert statisticians go and quote unquote debunk the claims, right?
Exactly.
Like regardless if the debunk is right or not, it's still important to get everyone to be able to think critically, like understand the statistics, understand how the statistics could be interpreted or misinterpreted, for either side. Like that is all part of like a robust, healthy national dialogue that you want.
Well, and some of the fun of YouTube used to be that someone would put out a video, someone would debunk it, and then somebody would rebut the debunking.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun because you didn't know how many times these people were going to go back and forth about stuff. And so you could get a lot of information about this one subject just from this thread of videos of, I'm right, no, you're not, I'm right, no, you're not, I'm right, no, you're not. And it was entertaining, but also informative. And it gave you that ability to take in both sides of the argument or multiple opinions and go, what do I actually think about this? Because maybe there was one common fact in all of the thread. Like everyone agreed on this one thing. So you knew that was probably true. But then every argument surrounding that fact, you could kind of make your own argument for or against or formulate your own opinion. And that was kind of the fun of going down the rabbit holes because you could see what other people thought about it. But now that you have all this censorship, you get one opinion. And so it must be fact.
Yeah. And the danger in that too is that I think that sort of creates this culture of black and white thinking. What you're talking about is like, that is a real-time demonstration about how complex issues are complex.
Right.
Like there's a lot of different ways to approach issues. There's a lot of different ways to argue issues. There's a lot of different facts that you might agree that a set of facts is correct, but you might disagree on the relevance of the facts to the issue at hand.
Right.
So it's like there's so much complexity in all this argumentation that you're totally missing out by banning one side of it.
Well, and it's akin to like religious, what do you call it? Is zealotry a word?
Yeah.
Religious zealotry. Because it's like, this is doctrine. This is what you must repeat. This is what you must believe. If you repeat anything else or you believe anything else, you're a heretic and you'll be burned at the stake. You're a witch.
Right.
Like it's really akin to that, but nobody can see that for whatever reason. They don't. I don't know if it's because saying religion makes them uncomfortable, kind of what we were talking about earlier, but they just don't understand that what they're doing is the same thing as somebody who is a religious zealot and for all the wrong reasons.
Right. Well, it's because they've separated themselves from the established religions. And so that means that what they're doing is not religious, which is totally not true.
Right.
They've just invented a new secular religion.
Right.
That they are unaware that they invented.
Right. And as far as I can tell, the secular religion has no good parts to it.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not many.
Because there's no higher goal to work towards.
As far as I can
all
tell,
negative.
the secular religion is essentially like the experts and the elites are the smart people. If you disagree with them, you're a pleb and you should shut up.
And you're a bigot and you're hateful.
Right.
And if you don't shut up voluntarily, we'll make you shut up.
Right.
Basically.
It's basically like the United States used to be a country of like, F your authority, man. I'm my own person, you know?
Yeah.
And now it's like the secular religion has created a whole bunch of sheep who are just, they're not only eager to listen to and follow the experts and educated people, they're demanding that you do as well. They're saying if you don't listen to the experts, you're uneducated, you're spreading misinformation, you can't ask questions critically, where are your credentials?
See, that's the part that I don't understand, because I can understand why people would crave authority and crave somebody who is a proclaimed expert telling them how to live and how to behave, because it's easier. It's like, I don't have to think for myself what I'm going to do and how I'm going to live. I'll just follow this other person who sets the rules and I don't have to think about it. And that's kind of why being a kid is so easy, because your parents have set rules for you and you follow them and it's easy. But being adult is not supposed to be easy. Being adult is supposed to be difficult, because that's how you learn. Mm-hmm. And so there shouldn't be people setting rules for you as an adult, except in this secular religion, people have appointed high priests of society and will follow them undyingly. But I don't understand why they want everyone else to do the same thing.
Well, I think it goes back to, I think I said this last one. It's like if you are exhibiting a lifestyle that's in direct opposition or incongruent with the lifestyle that someone else has chosen, that could be interpreted as a personal attack. Right. So if somebody has like internalized as their identity, I am a virtuous follower of the science. I do not question the science. I do not question the experts. If they tell me that I can save grandma by wearing a mask, I'm going to do so. When somebody like us comes around and says, I just don't see how the masks are doing anything. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever at any level of analysis. You're exhibiting a lifestyle or a thought that is in direct opposition to their identity that they've internalized.
Right.
And so that's not a rational debate at that point. That is somebody defending their sense of identity. They're saying, I'm a virtuous person. I chose the right path. You are the evil person that is trying to kill people, that is deliberately doing the wrong thing, deliberately being a Russian bot. I can see your little wires poking out over there. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not a rational response. If you question these people and you question them, they don't react in a way that somebody who's confident in their positions would react. I mean, so they want conformity.
Right. And I know it's not rational, so it's really hard to wrap your head around, because if they really enjoy following an authority figure and they want everyone else to follow an authority figure, you would think that the way to do that would not be shouting at them and calling them horrible names and telling them they're killing grandma or whatever. But it's what they do. Yeah. And then they expect that somehow that's going to make you want to follow an authority all of a sudden. It's like, you are the reason I do not want to follow authority, because this is what it's created.
Well, I don't think that they want to make people follow. I think that they're more interested in shaming and retribution against people that are in conflict with them. These people they're not kind, merciful people that want to show you the light, so to speak, and bring you in. They want to destroy opponents. And you see this in the outcropping of like this anti-Russian sentiment now. People are deliberately attacking or going after the Russian people, renaming the Moscow Mule, attacking Russian restaurants. Why? Because they don't care about the people. They care about retribution. They're adopting a mantle of virtue and then using that virtue to bludgeon anyone that they perceive as their enemy. That's what they do. They're not moral or righteous people. They're just evil little zealots.
Right. And then, that's why I said that I don't think there's anything good or beneficial to a secular religion.
Yeah.
There just isn't.
I don't think so.
It's all bad.
The other point that I wanted to make about Donald Trump here is that, ironically enough, I think that him being banned from social media is actually greatly increasing his chances of winning in 2024, because they no longer have ammo to say, look at this silly tweet or look at this podcast, look at what he said. They don't have that ammo anymore. And so, people have a tendency to rose-tinted glasses. So they're looking at the $7 a gallon gas prices. They're looking at the situation with Ukraine, and they're remembering none of this was happening under Donald Trump. Yeah. Nobody remembers any of the ridiculous shit that Donald Trump did during his term as president. I mean, you can maybe
except for Kofefe. Yeah. That's the only thing people can remember. And the I promise not to do this to Greenland thing. Right. Those are the only two tweets anybody can ever remember, because they were just so stupid
Yeah.
and so funny. And they were meant to be funny, I think. Maybe not the Kofefi one. But
I think the Kofefi one was like, he just fat fingered it. It was like, whatever.
But it became a meme, and like people have mugs that say it now, and it's like, it's my Kofefi. It's like, whatever. But
yeah, so no one remembers the bad of the Don. Like, people have short memories.
the
and
bad of the Don.
they're just remembering that they didn't have these problems when Donald Trump was president.
Yeah.
And so Donald Trump not continually making an ass of himself in public
Right.
is actually making, I think, him more favorable as a candidate.
Well, and I think, too, especially people who might be having buyer's remorse,
Yeah.
he's becoming more favorable to them as well, because they're like, okay, yeah, I don't like his personality, but I probably should have voted for him.
And that's an
think
easier
they're
pill
having-
to swallow if he's
yeah.
not in your face all the time.
True, because he's not reminding you like, hey, dumbass, you should have voted for me.
Right.
He's just like, when you see a clip of him, it's usually a coherent thought, because those are the only ones that really seem to circulate the internet now, which is interesting. But I think just in speaking, he doesn't say ridiculous things too often unless
No.
he's at a rally where he's trying to be funny and
in
hyperbolic.
In this podcast situation, like I said, I watched the whole thing before I got taken down. It was really good. Like, he's
Yeah.
a natural podcast guest.
Yeah.
He talks in his typical Trump style, repeats things a lot, but he answered all the questions that they asked him.
Yeah.
He didn't deflect. He didn't hum and haw.
Right.
He was talking like Donald Trump. He wasn't talking
Yeah.
like a politician. He didn't have any aides sitting right next to him whispering in his ear. He was just sitting there
Yeah.
answering their questions. So I'd really like to see him go on with Joe Rogan. I don't know why that hasn't happened yet, but he needs to go
Yeah.
on with Joe Rogan, because I would like to see
I-
him talk about the
well,
election and then have
yeah.
challenge Spotify. Like, go ahead, Spotify.
Well, and he might, now that he's been on with these other UFC guys, because they all run in the same circles.
Yeah.
I think before it just never happened, because when he was president, he only had like X amount of time and it had to be done at the White House. And it was a lot of terms that Joe Rogan just wouldn't agree to.
Yeah.
But now that he's not president, it might happen now, which would be really cool. And if Donald Trump is planning on running again in 2024, which he likely is, it would be a smart campaign move to be on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand what his hang up is. Like, it would be beneficial to go on now. Remind people, hey, I still exist. Hit Biden on all the issues.
Right.
Like, here's what I would do if I was president. You didn't have this when I was president. Like, get that in
maybe
people's
he's
mind.
waiting for Joe Rogan to invite him and not ask.
He could go on.
Yeah, he could go on.
There's no universe in which Donald Trump hits up Joe Rogan and says, I want to be on your show. And Joe Rogan goes, maybe not.
He'd be like, that lunatic? Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think, it would be smart to go on now, remind people that you still exist before you fade into the memory hole, right? Remind
Yeah.
people, that would be one of the most watched podcasts of all time, in my
Especially
opinion.
now coming up on midterms.
Right.
Yeah.
And then stay quiet until election season and then go back on.
I think the problem with Twitter is that sometimes he was just trying to use it to be funny.
Mm-hmm.
And people took it as, oh my God, our president's a clown.
Yeah.
But then they look at Joe Biden and they're like, oh my God, our president's a clown.
Yeah.
Like on national television.
Yeah.
Twitter's a different space.
And there's something so, like, just amazing to know that I know Donald Trump is writing his own tweets. Like, there's no question.
Yeah.
He's sitting there at a
3 a.m.
yeah, or at a diplomatic meeting and tweeting while somebody else is
yeah.
talking. And you know that all of Biden's tweets are from, like, interns or spokespeople who carefully pore over every word and make sure everything's in the right spot and that it's non-controversial. It's so sterile and boring.
I would love to see a Freedom Tunes episode of Joe Biden tweeting for himself and not his interns, because it'd be like, old corn pop used to say, don't wash your wagon or whatever. Like, it just something so ridiculous. But I don't know how I feel about Trump running again in 2024. But maybe it won't be so bad this time around because of all the reasons that we just laid out. Maybe people won't be as keen to turn him into a divisive figure because they are seeing the repercussions of their choice or not choice.
Yeah. It depends on how it plays out. There are some people speculating that we might get a Hillary Trump rerun in 2024.
Well, Hillary was like, oh, no, I'm never going to run again. silly. That was such a silly joke. And I was like, you are the fakest motherfucker ever. You're running again. Don't even give me that, you elderly lady.
Elderly. Okay, so this is the last story that I have.
Sure.
And it says from Ars Technica, Biden considers digital dollar. Here's how it could differ from regular money. And so I don't really want to go into what this all entails, but there are some security concerns, which is what I wanted to talk about briefly. So it says digital currency can be a tool for surveillance. Digital currency issued by a central bank can be used as a tool for government surveillance of citizens and control over their financial transactions. This has been a concern with China's digital currency, which is in the early stages of rollout. And this expert, Akram Karam, says, with digital yuan, the CCP will have direct control over and access to the financial lives of individuals without the need to strong-arm intermediary financial entities. So what he's basically saying here is, like, with a digital dollar, typically what happens is, the way I understand it, the Federal Reserve will have a balance sheet of how many dollars are available, and that will be given and divided up amongst the central banks for them to issue with loans and whatnot. The idea of a central bank digital currency is that it is digital currency that is owned by the Federal Reserve, and that the citizens would interact directly with the Federal Reserve. So there wouldn't be like intermediaries between, like your intermediary is your bank.
Right.
So you go to the bank and the bank goes to the bigger bank and that bank goes to the Federal Reserve.
So there's basically no protection.
With this, it's like the government is issuing money directly to you.
Which there's no protection then.
Right. And all transactions would go through that Federal Reserve system. So it's kind of like crypto where you'd have like your wallet address.
Right.
And so you send money, but it goes through the Federal Reserve owned system. And of course, the problem with that is, and I'm going to read this next section here. So this goes on to say, the Federal Reserve said that any U.S. issued digital currency would need to strike an appropriate balance between safeguarding the privacy rights of consumers, and affording the transparency necessary to deter criminal activity. So here it's a stated goal that they're going to be able to use this to deter criminal activity. Now we get into the problem of what are they going to determine as criminal activity?
Yeah.
So the vulnerability with a central bank digital currency is that they could shut off the spigot at any point, or they could block certain classes of transactions. So for instance, let's say that you were a convicted felon and you're not allowed to own guns. They could block your ability to purchase guns with a central bank digital currency. Now, that might be an appropriate use of that technology if we don't want felons to own guns, but the problem is it's not going to stop there.
Right.
We already have people, like, for example, on the no-fly list who really shouldn't be on the no-fly list because they haven't done anything. What happens when they apply that logic to money to this currency?
Right.
Oh, you're not allowed to buy X, Y, and Z, products. You're not allowed to spend your money on these investments. You're not allowed to do business with this entity. Like, they can control all of this to a very fine degree.
Well, and I see this being a problem too with, like, even food stamps. Like, you're only allowed to spend X amount of your food stamps every week with this digital currency. And it's like, okay, but you issued me enough food stamps for the month, so I should be able to spend it whenever I want for the entirety of the month. So I could see that, because yes, it'll affect felons and criminals and people like that, but it's always going to affect the lower classes more than anybody else. Always. Middle and lower class always get punished for the elites' decisions and choices. Always.
Right.
And the banks, as awful as they are, do act as some sort of safeguard and some sort of barrier between you and the federal government, because they're private entities that you are a customer at, and you have agreed to be their customer because of the safeguards that they provide to you. I don't like this. I don't like this at all.
Yeah, there's just a lot of opportunity for control. I mean, with cash currently, I could just give you some cash, and that's obviously not tracked. It's just cash, right? But if we were purely digital and using this digital, because like we have our dollar balances in a digital form, like my bank account I can access online. But that's not the same thing as a digital currency, because that's still fundamentally US dollars. That's still fundamentally going through the banks.
It's not a crypto currency.
But, like with the digital currency, I could say, oh, I'm gonna send you some money for dinner or whatever that we had just to pay you back. And if the government wants, they could block my ability to give money to anyone else, or to block my ability to give money to certain people or organizations. So they could say you're not allowed to donate your money to X, Y, and Z organization.
What if your family member is a convicted felon or something like that, or they're on trial for a crime that they may or may not have committed, and you are trying to send them money so they can buy food or they can do something because they're obviously not working if they're already convicted or they're going through the process of a trial by jury. Like it takes a lot of time. They can't work and they probably have to go to jail every night too. So it's like if you want to send them money so that they can buy things that they need or that they want, with this system, the courts could just say, no, you're not allowed to do that. No wiring money at all. And it's like, okay, so then that would be like cruel and unusual punishment to the person that's on trial or in jail.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope.
There's a ton of potential for abuse here.
Oh, yeah.
And so,
I don't like that at all.
I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up and say that that's coming.
Is it something that we can stop from happening, or is this an executive branch decision?
No, so the executive branch has acknowledged. So that what Biden said is he just wants a report on what the structure of that would look like and how that might be implemented and how it might be used by Americans and the federal government. But in order to actually implement such a system, the executive branch has acknowledged that it would need an express law written by Congress.
Okay.
So this is just exploratory, but you're going to start hearing the term central bank digital currencies a lot more. And this is the vulnerability with them. So we got to keep that in mind.
We got to get back into bartering and trade, I think, and probably get away from currency as best as we can.
Well, we'll see what happens. Cool. I think that's it. You got anything else?
I don't.
Okay. Well, that's it for this episode of Take Your Medicine. Once again, I'm Jacob.
And I'm Sadie.
And you can check out all of our links in the description wherever you're watching or listening. And yeah, thanks for watching.
See ya.